I want to talk about the word retard. What have you learned about the word retard recently?
Okay, so I was doing a bit of research into why things become offensive because it just became curious to me. I wanted to know, why are some things offensive and other things not offensive? And I began to sort of think about the word retard. And this is a word that's quite offensive. I mean, most people would consider it pretty offensive, especially in polite society. I mean, there are a lot of people who use it in jest, but there's a lot of people who find it offensive. And if you ask these people why they find it offensive, then they'll say, "Oh, it's because it was historically used to refer to mentally disabled people," which I think is a perfectly reasonable explanation. But then you ask these same people, do they find the word idiot offensive, or the word imbecile offensive, or the word moron offensive, or the word cretin offensive? And most people don't find these words offensive. I mean, a few people find cretin offensive, but most people don't find idiot or imbecile or moron particularly offensive. They use these are common words. But the thing is if you look at the history of these words, they were also used to refer to mentally disabled people. That's their origins. Their origins is actually they were used as categorizations of mentally disabled people. And I point out this example of the Queen's first cousins, who were officially diagnosed as imbeciles. And as a result of that, the royal family faked their deaths and basically locked them away in a care home for the rest of their lives. And when they died, the royal family didn't even attend their funeral. It was a pretty tragic story, but it goes to show that, the word imbecile was used even for members of the royal family if they were mentally disabled. And so there's this weird sort of disparity between the word retard and the other words which mean exactly the same thing, but which are not offensive. And you've got to ask yourself, what's the purpose for this? Why is the word retard offensive, but all these other words, which were used, again, for exactly the same reason, why are they not offensive? And I was looking into the history of these words, and the only conclusion that I could come to was that it was a purely arbitrary decision. So a group of people, a group of intellectuals, one day decided that the word was offensive, and they said as much to the people. And I don't know where it was officially established, but gradually it became offensive to use that word. And so we all collectively decided to have a specific emotional reaction to a certain word, but not to other words with the same meaning. And that strikes me as very strange, because it means that a lot of the things that outrage us are purely arbitrary. They're just arbitrarily chosen. There's no real reason why we should be upset or offended by a certain word. We just choose to be offended by it. And we choose to not be offended by other words. So this, I think, it was a big insight for me, because it really opened my eyes to exactly what outrage is. A lot of outrage is just manufactured. It's purely manufactured. You don't need to be angry about any of the things, or at least most of the things that you're angry about, in everyday life.
They're not rooted in anything more solid than simply people making choices in the past. You also use that example of, is it the NAACP?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So this is another thing that I've never understood, is that somehow the word colored people became offensive, and you had to use the term people of color instead. I've never understood why. I've never really understood why. I mean, I did ask somebody who was pretty sort of woke, and they said to me that it's because when you use colored people, you're centering color. But when you use people of color, you're centering people, because the first word is people rather than color. And so
oh, that's a fucking tenuous, very tenuous explanation.
Bizarre. I mean, I don't understand it, and I have no problem with people calling me a colored person. I don't find it offensive.
What's your heritage?
Indian.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Indian, Punjabi. So I don't have any problem with people calling me a colored person, and I don't think most colored people do. I don't think most of us do. have a problem with it.
Tell you what's really interesting is the NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what that's like is kind of like a fossilized record of what linguistic territory used to be acceptable. And because they haven't updated their branding to move in line with lexically what's now part of the green light, red light system, they're kind of this fossilized record of, oh, that used to be okay, but now it's not. So if there was the NAARP, right, for retarded people, you go, okay, well, hang on, is that a pejorative? Are you using that to refer to this entire group? What about the cretins in the room? And what about the morons in the room? What about them? Where are they? So, it's so...
The thing is that linguistic, all this kind of linguistic re-tribalizing of territory, is that it just creates outrages where outrages don't need to exist. We've already got enough things to be outraged about in this world. Plenty of things to be outraged about in this world. You know, if you've just got to switch on the news to see what's going on, you know, in some parts of the world. But the thing is that instead of like trying to do something about the things that outrage us, the things that we should be outraged about, some of the injustices that are occurring, for instance, you know, the concentration camps in China, for instance, instead we just sort of kind of redraw the territory of language and create new outrages out of it, out of nothing. We create new outrages out of nothing. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't understand why people would choose to be upset over, you know, the use of words.
Is that a little bit of
so many other things to be outraged about?
Sayer's law coming back in again? The fact that you can create outrage and posture the fact that you are helping, that this is something that you're really bothered about, but you know that by pushing back against coloured people or the word retard, that really the battlefront that you're playing on has pretty low stakes.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that if you're a member of an ideology and you're dedicated to a certain cause, then you have an invested interest in making that cause seem like a bigger issue than it actually is. So if you're an anti-racist, then you have a vested interest in making racism seem bigger than it actually is, because that makes your task and your job and your mission more important than it actually is. And that's why I think a lot of people who are sort of these, who define themselves as anti-racists, will constantly create new forms of racism because they need it. You know, I think somebody said, I've forgotten who it was, that they said that the demand for racism exceeds the supply, you know, and that's basically what's causing a lot of this kind of, this driving a lot of these new outrages and these new offenses, because people need racism in order to feel like they've got something to fight against. And if you look at, you know, if you look statistically, there does seem to be some racial disparities, but those racial disparities are not as big as they're portrayed in the mainstream media. And the mainstream media exaggerates these because it needs to feel like there's a big struggle that it's fighting against. And so that's, I think, probably the explanation for why the word coloured people is now offensive, because we need more and more things to be racist so that we can feel more anti-racist when we fight against them.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.